USA, NATO and NGSW 6.8mm. Back in the aftermath of World War II, the United States stepped up as the driving force behind NATO's standardized ammo, settling on the 7.62x51 for rifles and machine guns. That round packed a punch for its time, reliable in the mud and chaos of Korea. Then came the shift to 5.56x45 during Vietnam, lighter, allowing soldiers to carry more without the weight, dragging them down. Firing faster to suppress enemies in dense jungle fights. Fast forward, and those standards held strong for decades, shaping how infantry operated worldwide. The 5.56 became a staple, easy to handle in close quarters, with that familiar recoil snap that anyone who's squeezed a trigger on an M4 knows well. But as body armor got tougher, think ceramic plates shrugging off hits, the old rounds started showing limits. Enter the next generation squad weapon program, rolling out the 6.8x51 or 277 SIG Fury in hybrid cases, blending steel and brass to handle pressures over 80,000 psi without a hitch. This new caliber stretches effective range beyond 650 yards, punching through modern vests where 5.56 might glance off. Soldiers testing it report less kick, quicker follow-ups, and that extra edge in open terrain engagements. By 2026, units like the 101 Airborne are fielding M7 rifles chambered in it, quietly reshaping squad tactics. The ammo's design lets troops stay lighter on their feet, sustaining fire longer against peer threats. It's a practical evolution born from real-world lessons where every ounce and inch matters. Russia-Soviet Warsaw Pact Standard. When you look at the Eastern Bloc, you aren't just looking at a different set of calibers. You're looking at an entire ecosystem built to survive the harshest conditions on Earth. The Soviet standard, which still dictates the gear for dozens of nations today, was never about finesse. It was about raw reliability. It started with the 7.62x39 the round that made the AK-47 a global icon. It's a punchy, heavy-hitting bullet that doesn't care much about brush or light cover. Later, they leaned into the 5.45x39 for the AK-74, a faster, flatter shooting round designed to tumble when it hits, causing significant trauma despite its smaller size. But the real survivor in this lineup is the 7.62x54R. It's a bit of an anomaly. You can still find soldiers today loading this into an SVD sniper rifle or a PKM machine gun, even though the design features an old-school rimmed base that dates back to 1891. Most modern militaries ditched rimmed cartridges decades ago because they can cause feeding headaches in automatic weapons, yet the Russians engineered their way around it. It stayed in the fight through 2 world wars and every major conflict since. There is a certain rugged logic to it. If a design from the days of the Tsar still puts holes where you want them, you don't throw it away. You just build a tougher gun to cycle it. China 5.8x42 standard. While most of the world chose a side between the 2 major superpowers during the Cold War, China eventually decided to walk its own path. They spent years watching how the 5.56 performed for the West and how the 5.45 worked for the Soviets, before realizing they wanted something that belonged solely to them. This led to the creation of the 5.8x42, a cartridge that stands as a massive logistical island. By adopting the DBP-87 as their standard, they ensured that if a conflict ever broke out on their soil, an invading force couldn't simply pick up a fallen soldier's magazine and use it in their own rifles. The ballistics of the 5.8 are where things get interesting from a veteran's perspective. It was engineered to find a sweet spot that supposedly outclasses its rivals in almost every category. The Chinese military maintains that this specific 5.8 round flies with a flatter trajectory and carries more kinetic energy at longer ranges than the standard NATO glassbreaker. There is a heavy emphasis on penetration here, specifically designed to punch through modern body armor that might stop smaller, lighter, high-velocity rounds. It's a calculated middle ground. They didn't want to copy a homework assignment that was already decades old. Instead, they built a proprietary system that forces the rest of the world to keep guessing about how it truly performs in a sustained firefight. Switzerland 7.5x55 Swiss GP11. Switzerland might be a small spot on the map, but their approach to defense has always been fiercely independent and obsessively precise. For over a century, while neighbors were constantly swapping calibers to keep up with shifting alliances, The Swiss stuck to their guns with the 7.5x55 Swiss, famously known as the GP11. This cartridge was born from a culture that expects every citizen soldier to be a marksman. It was engineered with such tight tolerances that surplus military batches often outperform expensive modern match-grade ammunition you'd find on a civilian shelf today. The magic of the GP11 is best felt through the straight-pull K31 rifle, a piece of machinery that feels more like a fine watch than a weapon of war. Most people assume that old heavy rounds disappeared once smaller, faster bullets took over, yet the Swiss saw no reason to fix what was already perfect. Even as they started integrating with international partners and adopting modern platforms, they kept this 7.5mm powerhouse in the inventory. It still feeds the MG51 machine guns, proving that a design from the early 1900s can still hold its own on a modern battlefield. There is a quiet confidence in how they handle their logistics. They didn't build a round for mass production at the lowest cost. They built one that ensures when a shot is fired. In the Alps, it hits exactly where the shooter intended. Belgium 57x28 Standard. Back in the late 1980s, the engineers at Effen Herstal in Belgium were looking at a gap in the market that nobody else seemed to notice. Support personnel, drivers, medics, and radio operators needed a way to defend themselves against modern threats that a standard 9mm pistol simply couldn't handle. This led to the creation of the 57x28, a cartridge that looks like a rifle round that shrunk in the wash. When holding one of these tiny bottlenecked cartridges, it feels almost like a toy. It weighs about half as much as a standard handgun round, which means a soldier can carry significantly more ammunition without feeling the burn. That small size is deceptive, though. It was designed to scream out of a barrel at speeds that make traditional pistol bullets look like they are standing still. Because the projectile is so narrow and fast, it has this uncanny ability to zip right through the kind of soft Kevlar vests that would stop a much larger .45 caliber round cold. Shooting a weapon chambered in this caliber feels like operating a laser pointer. There is almost no muzzle rise, allowing for incredibly fast follow-up shots. It took nearly 30 years of debate and testing, but in 2021, NATO finally gave the 5.7 the official stamp of approval as a standardized caliber. It stands as a specialized standard for those who need high capacity and armor-piercing capability in a compact package. Sometimes being fast and precise is a better way to win a fight than relying on brute force. United Kingdom 303 British Standard. Long before the world worried about modular rails or polymer frames, the British Empire relied on a single piece of brass to hold its territory together. The 303 British, officially known as the 77x56R, defined the grit of 2 world wars. It was the lifeblood of the Lee Enfield, a rifle famous for a bolt action so fast that soldiers in the trenches often thought they were facing sustained machine gun fire. It features a heavy rim at the base, an old-school design choice that predates the modern flush-fitting cases seen in newer rifles. In the heat of a firefight, a soldier had to be careful how they stacked these in the magazine to prevent the rims from overlapping and jamming the action. Despite that mechanical hurdle, the stopping power was undeniable. Even after the UK moved on to modern NATO calibers, this old heavy hitter didn't disappear. You can still find it today, slung over the shoulders of border guards and rural police forces across the Commonwealth. There is something to be said for a design that debuted in 1888 and still manages to command respect in the field. It carries a certain elegance, a reminder of a time when the reach of a rifle was the only border that mattered. Germany 792x57 Mauser Standard. If you want to find the DNA of almost every modern cartridge used today, you have to look at Germany in the late 1880s. They developed the 792x57 Mauser, often just called the 8mm Mauser, and it effectively killed off the era of clumsy, oversized bullets. This round was the backbone of the German military through 2 world wars, feeding everything from the iconic K98K bolt action to the terrifying MG42 machine gun. The critical innovation was the rimless casing design. While other empires were still struggling with cartridges that had bulky flanges at the base, the Germans opted for a smooth flush design with a recessed groove for the extractor to grab. This 57mm case allowed for much smoother feeding from a magazine, and more importantly, it allowed for higher rates of fire without the risk of the rounds tangling up inside the gun. It set the blueprint for how a military cartridge should behave. Handling a rifle chambered in 8mm Mauser is a visceral experience. It carries a massive amount of energy, delivering a punch that stays lethal well past the half-mile mark. It was so well engineered that even after the wars ended, many other nations grabbed the blueprints to build their own systems. When you look at the shape of a modern 7.62 NATO or even a 30-06, you are essentially looking at a descendant of this German standard. They didn't just build a round for their own army, they accidentally designed the universal template for 20th century warfare. Sweden 65x55 Swedish. When Sweden sat down in the 1890s to design a standard for their military, they weren't interested in the bruising recoil or the heavy-handed firepower that most other empires favored. They wanted a surgical tool. The result was the 65x55 Swedish Mauser, a cartridge that looks deceptively slender compared to the chunky rounds used by the great powers of the time. It was a choice based on the belief that a soldier who isn't afraid of their rifle's kick will always be more lethal. There is a reason this caliber stayed in frontline service for nearly a century and remains a favorite among long-range shooters today. The magic lies in its aerodynamics. Because the bullet is long and thin, it boasts a high ballistic coefficient, meaning it slices through the air and resists wind drift with a stubborn efficiency. Even at distances where other rounds start to tumble or lose energy, the 6.5 stays stable. The 55mm case length provides just enough powder to get the job done without punishing the shooter's shoulder. It is the grandfather of the modern precision craze we see today. Most people buying the latest 6.5 Creedmoor for their hobby rifles are actually shooting a refined version of a concept the Swedes perfected over 100 years ago. They understood early on that hitting a target at 600 yards was a matter of math and finesse. France National 75x54 MAS Standard. After the smoke cleared from World War I, France realized they were stuck with the 8mm Lebel, an archaic tapered cartridge that was a nightmare for any modern automatic weapon. They knew they needed a fresh start. This led to the birth of the 75x54 MAS, a sleek rimless round that gave their military a modern edge. It was built to feed flawlessly into the MAS-36, a bolt-action rifle so compact and rugged that a soldier could easily forget how much punch the round actually packed. The 54mm case length provided a stable platform for sustained fire. It served infantry rifles and heavy-hitting machine guns, like the AA-52, for decades. What captures the attention of anyone who has studied French logistics is how stubbornly they held on to this caliber. Even as neighboring countries were jumping on the NATO bandwagon, the French military kept their 7.5 alive through brutal jungle fights in Indochina and long desert campaigns in Algeria. They maintained a strictly national ecosystem for their primary small arms. The eventual arrival of the FAMAS with its futuristic bullpup silhouette signaled the time to finally pack away this unique standard in favor of the common 5.56. Looking back, the MAS round was a reliable, hard-working choice for a nation that valued its own engineering identity in a world that was rapidly standardizing everything. India 7.62x39. India occupies a fascinating space in the world of ballistics, acting as a bridge between colonial history and a drive for total self-reliance. For decades, the Indian infantry was defined by the legacy of the British 303, but as the geopolitical landscape shifted, they realized they needed a system that belonged to the subcontinent. This led to the development of the INSAS, a domestic rifle designed to chamber the 5.56x45 caliber. It was a massive undertaking to move a billion-person nation away from heavy old-school lead toward the high-velocity standards of the modern era. There is a specific challenge to maintaining a standard in a place as diverse as India. The ammunition has to perform in the thin, freezing air of the Himalayas and the sweltering, humid jungles of the south. Interestingly, while they adopted the 45mm case length common in the West, they found that the extreme conditions of their borders demanded something a bit more versatile. Recently, there has been a noticeable shift back toward heavier hitters. The Indian military has begun integrating the 7.62x51 for frontline troops, again seeking a balance between the rapid-fire capability of small-bore rounds and the raw stopping power needed for mountain warfare. It is a constant evolution. They are essentially running a massive real-world lab, testing how global standards hold up when pushed to the absolute environmental limit. Watching this transition feels like seeing a superpower find its own voice one magazine at a time. Each of these rounds tells the story of a nation's survival. Whether you value Swiss precision or Soviet grit, the right caliber is the one that brings you home. Which of these standards do you trust? Most drop a comment below, hit subscribe, and let's keep the brass flying.